Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jayam Vishnu Pad Paramamsa Parivrajikacharya Astu Parasatashishima His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai Mayapur Dhama Ki Jai Shamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shrimate Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are continuing our lead-up classes to the weekend of the Prabhupada Festival. It's celebrating, it'll be the first day of the festival is the 17th of September, Saturday, and that is the anniversary of the day that Srila Prabhupada arrived in the Boston Harbor in 1965. A very memorable day for all of us. So we're doing a weekend. Over the weekend we'll have a festival in his honor, Srila Prabhupada's honor, the second annual festival in honor of Srila Prabhupada at Bhaktivedanta Manor. We want to continue it indefinitely. And yesterday we had a wonderful class by Moksha Lakshmi Devi Dasi. She was saying how many predictions there were for someone to come and to the West and spread the science of Krishna consciousness to the people of the West who were so ignorant of that science, that glorious science. And also she related many wonderful pastimes between herself and Srila Prabhupada. So today what I would like to discuss is the qualities that Srila Prabhupada had and brought with him that enabled him to be so amazingly successful in his Herculean attempt to spread Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's glories. Recently I was in Spain for the Pandavasena retreat, and there they were studying this canto, the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Bhagavatam classes every morning. And they read this verse, and I immediately related it to Srila Prabhupada, so I thought it would be wonderful to discuss the qualities expressed in this verse. It's a verse spoken by Lord Rishabhdev, the 5th canto, chapter 5. It was mentioned by someone who studies these things that of all the chapters that Prabhupada quoted, the one that he quoted most in the Bhagavatam was 1st canto, 2nd chapter, Divinity and Divine Service. And the one he quoted second was in the 7th canto, the 5th chapter, Prahlad Maharaj, the saintly son of Hiranyakashipu. Many famous verses there. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, many verses we all have heard many times. And this chapter, in the 5th canto, was the one that he quoted the third most often. The teachings of Lord Rishabhdev to his 100 sons, headed by Bharat Maharaj. So it's a very glorious chapter, full of profound instructions. So we can just begin with this text 24. Drita tanur ushati me purani. Drita tanur ushati me purani. Yene hasatvam paramam pavitram. Yene hasatvam paramam pavitram. Shamodama satyam anugrahascha. Shamodama satyam anugrahascha. Tapastikshanubhavascha yatra. Tapastikshanubhavascha yatra. Drita tanur ushati me purani. Yene hasatvam paramam pavitram. Samodama satyam anugrahascha. Tapastikshanubhavascha yatra. Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda. Jai Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman. Jai Shri Shri Gauranitai. Hare Krishna. Drita tanur ushati me purani. Yene hasatvam paramam pavitram. Shamodama satyam anugrahascha. Tapastikshanubhavascha yatra. ladies. Tatana Rushati Me Purani Neha Satvam Paramam Pavitram Namastacha Manugrascha Pastatikshanu Gavaschayatra Tatana Rushati Me Purani Drita, maintained by transcendental education. Tanu, body. Ushati, free from material contamination. Me, my. Purani, eternal. Yena, by whom? Iha, in this material world. Sattvam, the mode of goodness. Paramam, supreme. Pavitram, purified. Shama, control of the mind. Dhamma, control of the senses. Satyam, truthfulness. Anugraha, mercy. Cha, and. Tapaha, austerity. Titiksha, tolerance. Anubhavaha, realization of God and the living entity. Cha, and. Yatra, wherein. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Vedas are my eternal, transcendental sound incarnation. Therefore, the Vedas are Shabda Brahma. In this world, the brahmanas thoroughly study all the Vedas, and because they assimilate the Vedic conclusions, they are to be considered the Vedas personified. The brahmanas are situated in the supreme transcendental mode of nature, sattva-gun. Because of this, they are fixed in mind-controlled, shama, sense control, dhamma, and truthfulness, satya. They describe the Vedas in their original sense, and out of mercy, anugraha, they preach the purpose of the Vedas to all conditioned souls. They practice penance, tapasya, and tolerance, titiksha, and they realize the position of the living entity and the Supreme Lord, anubhava. These are the 8 qualifications of the brahmanas. Therefore, among all living entities, no one is superior to the brahmanas. Purport. This is a true description of a brahmana. A brahmana is one who has assimilated the Vedic conclusions by practicing mind and sense control. He speaks the true version of all the Vedas. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Vedaischa sarver aham eva vedya. By studying all the Vedas, one should come to understand the transcendental position of Lord Sri Krishna. One who actually assimilated the essence of the Vedas can preach the truth. He is compassionate to conditioned souls who are suffering the threefold miseries of this conditional world due to their not being Krishna conscious. A brahmana should take pity on the people and preach Krishna consciousness in order to elevate them. Sri Krishna himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, personally descends into this universe from the spiritual kingdom to teach conditioned souls about the values of spiritual life. He tries to induce them to surrender unto him. Similarly, the brahmanas do the same thing. After assimilating the Vedic instructions, they assist the Supreme Lord in his endeavor to deliver conditioned souls. The brahmanas are very dear to the Supreme Lord due to their high sattva-guna qualities, and they also engage in welfare activities for all conditioned souls in the material world. Om Ganata Marandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskya Tadesha Tarane. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So I'll read the verse once more. It's a bit of a long verse, but full of wonderful information, transcendental information. The Vedas are my eternal, transcendental, sound incarnation. Therefore, the Vedas are Shabda Brahma. In this world, the brahmanas thoroughly study all the Vedas, and because they assimilate the Vedic conclusions, they are also to be considered the Vedas personified. The brahmanas are situated in the supreme transcendental mode of nature, sattva-guna. Because of this, they are fixed and mind-controlled, sama, sense-control, dhamma, and truthfulness, satya. They describe the Vedas in their original sense, and out of mercy, anugraha, they preach the purpose of the Vedas to all conditioned souls. They practice penance, tapasya, and tolerance, titiksha, and they realize the position of the living entity and the Supreme Lord, anubhava. These are the 8 qualifications of the brahmanas. Therefore, among all living entities, no one is superior to the brahmanas. So, I've divided this verse, or the verse and the purport, so we can study it a little closely. So these are the 8 qualifications of the brahmanas mentioned in this verse and other verses, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita. Other qualifications are mentioned, but here we're concentrating on these. That the first one is they're situated in sattva-gun, which here is just called the supreme transcendental mode of nature. So it's also known Suddha Sattva, that it's no longer influenced by passion and ignorance. And because they're in this Suddha Sattva situation, their mind is controlled, which is called shama. Also, their senses are controlled, and they are truthful. They don't adulterate the message of the Vedas, but they give that message as it is. Then from these qualifications, these qualities, they have this sense of wanting to give this knowledge to others, which is here called anugraha, mercy. In order to do this successfully, they naturally practice austerity and penance, tapasya. They're also very tolerant. The conditioned souls are quite resistant to this message. So tolerance is an essential quality in order to preach successfully. And they have complete realization of the position of the jiva, the living entity, the spirit soul, and the Supreme Lord. So this is the 24th verse in this chapter, and it's interesting to see the arc of Lord Rishabhadev's teachings to his sons, that he begins by explaining to his 100 sons, who are very qualified, especially his eldest, Bharat Maharaj, that those of us who have accepted human bodies are not meant to enjoy sense gratification. Sense gratification is enjoyed by the dogs and the stool-eating hogs, and human beings are meant for something more. And this something more is explained at the very beginning of this chapter as tapo divyam. It's the same word we find here. Tapasya, tapo divyam, but for a transcendental attainment, We want to attain the divine position with this tapasya. We don't want to attain any material assets or qualifications. And by doing this, the heart is purified by this tapodivyam, transcendental austerity. And then we can attain eternal life. And then he explains that how to do this, we must accept the service of the Mahatmas, the great souls. This is the gate to this eternal life of bliss and knowledge. And we want to serve them selflessly and learn to see as they do without making distinctions between living entities. In this way we can become free from anger. And of course the Mahatmas engage in sublime activities. They never do anything degraded. So in this way he explains very systematically how it's essential for us in the human form of life to stop trying to perform fruitive activities. He called this as madness. And he insists, Rishabhdev insists, as all the acharyas do, that ultimately there's no happiness in this material world. And one who thinks there is happiness here is simply called mad. That happiness is not found by uniting the senses with the sense objects. That is simply a material combination. And we are spiritual. So this is emphasized repeatedly by these verses leading up to text 24. And then he explains that those who take the responsibility of being a spiritual master, whether a father, a mother, a spiritual master, any sort of relative, we're obliged to save our dependents from repeated birth and death. This is the obligation of the spiritual master. And he goes on to accept that one who has accepted a Paramahamsa, a highly elevated person, that person develops faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And they learn to remove themselves from the attractions of this world. They give up enmity and anger. And through this practice of bhakti yoga, they actually sever the hard knot in the heart that keeps us in this material world, basically from the attraction between men and women. And he tells his son to be very careful in this endeavor. There is danger at every step. But for those who are serious, they consider the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be the chief aim of life. And they consider that their responsibility to try to themselves accept this mercy in their own lives and give it to others. Then he says something even more extraordinary here. He says, he goes through the various species of life. He actually starts with non-dull matter, and he explains that higher than dull matter is grass, and higher than grass are the snakes, and higher than the snakes are the animals. Still higher than the animals are the human beings. Above the human beings, there's so many varieties of demigods. The highest of all the demigods is Lord Brahma. He says, since Lord Shiva is the son of Lord Brahma, Brahma is even considered superior to Lord Shiva. But Brahma is also subordinate to me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because I am inclined to the brahmanas are best of all. He puts the brahmanas even above himself. So he goes on, then we come to this beautiful verse that we read today, where we're hearing about the qualities of the brahmanas. What's not mentioned here, which is very prominent in Srila Prabhupada's life, is described by his own name, Abhaya, fearless. That he was so fearless and courageous to go on the Jaladuta at such an advanced age. We know he had no funds, he had no support, he had no friends, he had never left India before. And he was not in particularly good health. So that fearlessness is a very prominent quality that we see in Srila Prabhupada. But we should understand that this courageous mood is there also in materialists. We know that there are materialists who struggle to climb the Himalayas, who go to the bottom of the ocean, they go up in space, they go to Antarctica, they go to the Arctic. So Krishna says in the Gita that one of his qualities from the 10th chapter of the Gita, he says, I am adventure. So this courageous spirit can also be there materially. We see it, that these people do these very dangerous activities. They may not be well known for it, or they may be after fame, but they are materially motivated. However, Srila Prabhupada's courageousness was simply motivated by the desire to fulfill the instruction of his spiritual master. We know his spiritual master told him, even before Prabhupada was initiated, that you're an educated young man, why don't you preach this message to the English-speaking people of the world, the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada took that to heart. At that time he was married, so he couldn't act on it immediately. He thought it would be an injustice to his wife and his son. But he took it to heart, and he kept it in his heart. And that courageous eagerness and his fearlessness came out when he boarded the Jaladuta after so many difficulties getting permission from the Indian government to leave, so many struggles to get the passport, to get the P form, to get the support from the U.S. So finally he boarded that cargo ship and started his journey. And because he had these qualities in full, he had complete unexpected success. So it's mentioned here that the brahmanas thoroughly study all the Vedas, and because they have assimilated the Vedic conclusions, they are also to be considered the Vedas personified. There's a very long chapter in the Krishna book, 10th canto, Prayers by the Vedas personified, and to think that Srila Prabhupada is also to be considered the Vedas personified. But certainly he was constantly absorbed in the Vedas, every morning translating. This photograph was taken on the roof of the Juhu building, one of the tenant buildings in Juhu. In the afternoon, occasionally he would also read his books, and he would explain that they're actually Krishna's books. It's not that they're his books. And he would relish them and constantly speaking from them, supporting his statements by verses from the Bhagavatam and other scriptures. When we hear, on Mondays, we hear his classes, and every statement is supported by a shloka. It has an unlimited number of shlokas to support his statements, his teachings. So it's a great source of inspiration for us that he was so fully absorbed in the Vedas, that these are the eternal, transcendental sound incarnations of the Lord. And because he had assimilated these conclusions, therefore he could speak them with such impact that they would change the hearts of those who listened, sever that hard knot of material attachment. Also, it's explained that he was in this sattva guna, the supreme transcendental mode of nature. And this means that he was unwavering in his determination, in his faith, and undisturbed by the modes of passion and ignorance, transcendental to these. And also happiness would come, distress would come, and he would be equipoised about these things. My husband and I made this film, Hare Krishna, the mantra, the movement, and the Swami who started it all. And my service, one of my services for this film was to find recordings of Srila Prabhupada speaking about his own life and what he had gone through in his life. We felt that if he said it, it would have far more impact than if anyone else said it. So I went through lectures and room conversations, and it was very difficult to find Prabhupada talking about his own life. He would speak the philosophy. Very rarely, it was like gold for me to find. Perhaps a few times he spoke about his difficulties on the Jaladuta that fortunately we were able to find and put in the film. but it was very rare. Ordinarily, if a person has a life-threatening experience, a traumatic near-death experience, you tell your father, you tell your mother, you tell your children, you tell strangers. It's like, but Prabhupada minimized it. He really minimized what he went through. He just accepted it as coming from Krishna and went on. So that was something unusual, something very extraordinary in Prabhupada. That when you spoke to him, you heard from him, you were hearing the philosophy. Rarely would you hear about his own trials and tribulations and what he went through personally. So this was in 1971. Prabhupada took a few of his followers on a pilgrimage to Vrindavan. And he personally went and showed the holy places. And once in a while he would relate the pastimes. He's relating Mother Yasoda looking in the mouth of Krishna and seeing everything there was to see, all the universes, even herself looking in the mouth of Krishna. So certainly Prabhupada was thoroughly familiar with this pastime, and yet he got such joy from relating it. So this is actually related to mind control, that if we want to ultimately control our mind, which is called shama here, we learn that it's more difficult than controlling the wind. But it is possible by constant practice, by detachment, but ultimately by engaging in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service, in relishing these pastimes of the Lord and becoming absorbed in those pastimes. Then we can feel his shelter and be convinced of his presence. And then this idea of sense control becomes second, it's not an issue anymore. And we can see that with Srila Prabhupada, that he was actually relishing Krishna's presence, Krishna's pastimes. And so this idea of uniting the senses with their objects was completely irrelevant. It wasn't an issue anymore. So we go on to this idea of sense control Dhamma. Prabhupada would travel from Calcutta to Mayapur, which is fairly long. It's actually not so far in terms of miles, but because the roads are poor and because there are many small villages on the way, it would take quite a bit of time. So halfway he would stop in a mango grove and take some prasadam and also sit and talk with his disciples. And this is the idea of prasadam. Honoring prasadam is the type of sense control by getting this higher taste. Prabhupada would repeatedly introduce us to this higher taste. So this is another quality, truthfulness, satya, that he describes the Vedas in their original sense, and he doesn't distort the Vedas for personal interests. Malati Prabhu gives the example that when she was first coming to hear Prabhupada, she heard this statement from him, "There is no love in this material world." It's a radical statement because the whole material world, everyone is looking for love, so-called love. And it struck her how true it was. And she was in her 20s. And she said, yes, this is actually the fact, that there's no selfless love in this material world. There's always a motive. Somebody wants something. If they don't get it, the love is over. So it's not really love. Love is meant to be lasting. So this is a type of example that Prabhupada didn't mince the truth. He didn't cut corners or try to make it something that it wasn't. But he described it as it is described, as we heard from Rishabdev in these teachings very briefly. This life, this human form of life is not meant for sense gratification. Who says that? Who says that in this world? Everyone's saying the opposite. So to have one person that stands up and says, no, that is not the purpose of human life, that is something truly extraordinary, that there's no misinterpretation But it's there to awaken our soul, to relieve us of our ignorance. And Prabhupada did it with the utmost humility, with the utmost understanding. So another quality that we read was anugraha, which means mercy, that he preaches to all conditioned souls, and he could manage to reciprocate with everyone, whether a PhD or a big business magnate, or as we see here, a child. Prabhupada found the ways and the means to exchange with all sorts of personalities effectively. You know, he would be disturbed in his classes if children made noise. So the children and the mothers very often would go to another place to hear the class. But then Prabhupada arranged that after the class, he would distribute cookies to each and every child. They were called Prabhupada cookies. So every child would come up. If they were too small to walk, the parents would carry them. And Prabhupada would patiently give each child this cookie. And at one point, Hare Krishna, all glories to Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda, all glories to Shri Shri Sitaram, Lakshman, Hanuman, all glories to Shri Shri Gaurnitai. At one point, Prabhupada's secretary at the time, Brahmananda, said, "Oh, Prabhupada, you must be tired. You know, he's been up since 2 a.m. translating, taking his walk. He gave an extensive Bhagavatam class. Surely he wants to rest at this time." So Brahmananda, at that time sannyasi, said, "Swami, I will distribute the cookies on your behalf." And Prabhupada said, No, I want to distribute the cookies. It was his relationship with the children, and he valued that. It's not that he minimized it, but he valued it and encouraged the children in that way. That was something very personal and sweet that he did. So here we learn about tapasya, austerity of the body and the mind. And this is emphasized by Rishabdev, as I mentioned, tapo divyam. Without austerity, there's no possibility of making advancement. But this is not to be manufactured, but we follow the austerity given in the scriptures very specifically. And we learn about the austerity of the mind. It's mentioned in the Gita. Satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, self-control, detachment from sense gratification, also thinking of others' welfare. This is a very important part of the austerity of the mind. And also being devoid of duplicity. It's not that we say one thing and do another. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very strict about that. The pastime of Chota Haridas. Chota Haridas simply glanced at a woman inappropriately, and for that, Lord Chaitanya banished him from his company. So this idea of being devoid of duplicity is also critical in our progress in Krishna consciousness and an aspect of austerity. So this is Srila Prabhupada walking on his morning walk in Mayapur. That once he gathered many disciples and opened many temples, certainly there was success, but there were also many disappointments. Many people could not fulfill their initiation vows. That Prabhupada would sometimes be criticized by his godbrothers, be criticized by the parents of devotees. There were so many challenges that he had. His own health was sometimes difficult. So despite this, he had no hesitation about continuing full force. That he was free from this desire to find fault with others and correct them unnecessarily, and determined to fulfill the desire of his spiritual master despite all these disappointments and apparent setbacks, without being agitated or frustrated. This is an amazing quality, not to be sorry in the face of apparent failure, but to go on patiently also another quality, not so much mentioned in this verse, but the simplicity. Very respectful, full of the idea of the value of each and every person that he came across. It's not that he made distinctions between people, but always approached them with this transcendental objective. The astonishing thing was that, as it's mentioned here by Krishna, as I mentioned in the previous verse, that he considers the brahmanas even superior to himself. So here we have Srila Prabhupada, the topmost brahmana, and yet he never had pride or a superiority complex. Always felt himself the humble servant of his spiritual master, and very ready to offer all sorts of encouragement to others and to correct them without bearing a grudge, to correct them simply for their benefit, but not out of any sense of false ego. So in this way, he had this faith that he had in his spiritual master, in the potency of the holy name, and in the ultimate goal that we're all meant to attain. He remained fixed in that without deviation. So this was 1972, also in Vrindavan. That this is also extraordinary, because at this time, this was Kartik, 1972, and at this time, for those who have read this book, recent book by Giriraj Swami, I'll Build You a Temple, Prabhupada's land in Juhu was undergoing all sorts of litigation troubles. The lawyers, our lawyer and the lawyer of the other party were in cahoots, which we didn't know for some time. And they were trying to cheat us in every conceivable way. It was a very difficult time. Our investment was at risk, and it was a very large investment for us at that time. And yet Prabhupada went to Vrindavan for Kartik and sat at the Radha Damodar temple and spoke every morning on Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter, and every evening on the Nectar of Devotion. And you would never know that this really tremendous problem was going on in Bombay, just down the coast from. It was like he was in a different world. He could remove himself from these problems and become fully absorbed in Krishna, and remain equipoised in the face of these very Herculean problems, legal problems, and his disciples admitted that they were not fit to deal with these lawyers and this litigation. They didn't know, even in America, they wouldn't have been fit. What to speak of India, where it's quite different. But, Prabhupada remained untouched by that, and sat in this holiest of dhams and chanted and spoke the beautiful Bhagavatam and the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So the last quality mentioned here is to realize the position of the living entity and the Supreme Lord, Anubhava. Anubhava. We were just, on the occasion of the Queen's passing, we were reading verses from the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and purports also. And in one of the purports, Prabhupada mentions how rare it is for someone to thoroughly understand the position of the living entity, the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in all major and minor detail. These things are vastly misunderstood by the vast majority of human beings. So it's very rare to find somebody who actually has a firm understanding of these intricate facts presented in the Vedas. So we are very fortunate to be under the shelter of Prabhupada and to hear from him very clearly, very logically, very reasonably, fully supported by the scriptures, these truths about the living entity, about the Supreme Lord, about the Lord in the heart. This is a great fortune for us. We should never underestimate or overlook or minimize how fortunate we are to have access not just to the knowledge, but also to the process of understanding the knowledge and also to the people who are sincerely trying to follow this process. That association will support us, and the knowledge will reinvigorate us, give us hope that we can achieve the goal. So, these are the 8 qualifications of the brahmanas. Therefore, amongst all living entities, no one is superior to the brahmanas. Those are a few thoughts on this verse. I hope there's some discussion about it. Thank you for your attention. Yes, please.
These different photographs, are they all like dated or like a place known? We got like thousands of these photographs. I'm just, because you know them, because you, maybe more because you've snapped a lot of them, but...
Yeah, well, this was the installation of Shri Krishna Balaram in the Vrindavan temple. Prabhupada did the first arti, and it was an amazing, heroic moment. He had undergone such difficulties to open that temple, as to do anything in India practically. And so when he did the first arti, it was just an incredible occasion. Yeah, all these pictures are in the Bhaktivedanta archives in North Carolina, and they're, as far as possible, they've dated them and put the place and all the information they can find about them. Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji Shakra. Thank you for a lecture. Please accept my dandavats. And I have a question. In introduction, on Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada said that jivas are cooperators of Krishna. They are not enjoyers and not controllers. And he said one sentence that by cooperation they enjoy. So I have a question. Is it right for us, for Vaishnavas, to seek this kind of enjoyment, to enjoy through cooperation? Can we set up like a goal to enjoy, to service to Prabhupada, to set up, to cooperate, where we can cooperate to enjoy? Is it right to set?
Yes, that's what we're trying to do in this Bhaktivedanta Manor and all of Prabhupada's temples, is cooperate together for the pleasure of Krishna, and then our enjoyment will be real and lasting and genuine. This is the goal. Definitely. We want to cooperate.
One of the main qualities of Prabhupada was that he always followed instructions of Bhakti, his spiritual master, and he kept in touch with the God brothers who followed Bhakti Thakur's instructions. His sister, Pashima, she supported Prabhupada when Prabhupada had to go to the West to spread Krishna consciousness. She told Prabhupada, I will look after the family, you go and follow the instruction, what you have been given. This is in a book, one of the Prabhupada disciples wrote a book about...
Mula Prakriti? Is it in Mula Prakriti's book?
Maybe, something in strange land. Swami is strange, it's in there. Yeah.
Yogeshwar.
Yeah, it's mentioned in there. And also it mentions how Prabhupada's children, he tried to bring them in, but he couldn't. But,
Prabhupada's children?
He tried to bring him into Krishna consciousness. I think only one of them came, Vrindavan Das. But even then, he wasn't really following. Prabhupada was trying to, at the same time, he wasn't attached to them. He was trying to bring them in, but he was, in his lectures, Prabhupada mentions that I gave up my family, but now I got a bigger family. Spreading Krishna consciousness, a bigger family is there. So Prabhupada showed us by example how by entering Krishna's family, you enter the bigger family.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mother Vishaka. I just had two questions. One is you talked about how Srila Prabhupada never mentioned about his his heart attacks or
Rarely.
really, yeah,
Rarely.
yeah, very. I think maybe I heard it. If you could just verify, was it 2 times that he mentioned? Is only 2 times in
I
the
think so,
audio.
yeah. Recorded. Of course, we don't know about not recorded, but recorded.
But only 2 recorded times. Okay. And just my other question was, when Satsvarup Maharaj was putting together the Prabhupada Lilamrit, did they mention anything to Srila Prabhupada that they were going to do this, or do you know anything about that?
That was after Prabhupada's departure, to my knowledge. The Prabhupada Lilamrita was initiated after Prabhupada's departure.
Okay, so there was no talk with Srila Prabhupada before his departure that they were planning to do this? Or?
No, I never heard that happened.
Okay.
Okay, I remember that in the Lilamrita, I have a vague remembrance of it just before Prabhupada leaving, that someone asked him about his life. It's there, I just remember reading it, I mean, maybe 20 years ago, but I still remember that they did ask Prabhupada to give some account of his life, but it's there somewhere, but I don't know how it is recorded.
For the purpose of the Lilamrita?
No, it's just that...
just generally?
Generally, they said, Prabhupada, would you like... And he was kind of reluctant, but he said, okay, and he gave some account. But that I just remember that it's somewhere there. I can look it up. But
in 1973, maybe, or 4, my husband and I made the first film about the Hare Krishna movement, called the Hare Krishna People. So for that film, we wanted to have a reenactment of Prabhupada's childhood Rath Yatra. So we asked him what his Rath cart looked like, because we wanted to make it as authentic as we could. So he asked for a piece of paper and a pen, and he actually drew his childhood Rath cart. It had a horse on the cart and a driver of the horse. So we made that as best we could for this Hare Krishna People film. So, when he was asked, these things would come out, but they didn't often volunteer them. Or if they did come out, they were just part of the flow of the discussion. It was unusual, For most of us, we want people to know how much we're suffering, etc., or how much we've done. Any other comments or? One more.
Hare Krishna, Mother Vishaka, thank you. No, I was just thinking actually about these 8 qualities of brahmana that we just talked about. And then Prabhupada also mentions in the purport here that he's talking about, he tries to induce them to surrender unto him. So he's talking about, surrender here. So I was just trying to link up, these 8 qualities. If we develop, does it ultimately lead to surrender, or is it if we surrender, then these 8 qualities automatically manifest?
I mean, which comes first, the surrender or the qualities?
I was just thinking that, or they go hand in hand probably.
Yeah, I would think they go hand in hand, that as we come closer to controlling the mind, controlling the senses, understanding the Vedas, we naturally are inspired to surrender, and then that surrender evokes more sense control, mind control, the feelings of mercy towards others.
Yeah.
So in this way they go hand in hand. It's not that one comes first and the others come later.
Yeah, because if, when we talk specifically about Jaladuta, I was reflecting that it's like Prabhupada's body, mind, words, everything was like all surrendered, 100%. like, you just talked about Juhu, there was so much going on, but he could still go for Kartik and just talk about, just think about being Krishna conscious. That's what Prabhupada says, that's our main business. So, but that is also the final instruction of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, just to surrender. So, but yeah, it's very difficult as well at the same time. So, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to share some thoughts on surrender.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Just some fruits because someone said it's only fruits.
Thank you.
These are the snaps that when we hear in the book you have to do this, do that, get past this person.
We should do it with the others, Dilip and Kaushik, at least 3 of us, because they are the businessmen. So it'd be good if we met with them. Dilip, yeah, you met Dilip, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Radhanath Swami is here this week.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama.